One of the best ways that I have found to explain how healing trauma works with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, believe it or not, it's all about the fingernails. Let's go ahead, let's get into it. Hi everybody, my name is Jill. Welcome back to the Journey Sage. And this is the channel that I wish had been around when I was healing my PTSD from childhood trauma way back when with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, because this topic really would have been helpful. You see, I have a pretty strong left brain. I like organizations. I love a good outline. And so I really assumed throughout my therapy, at least when I first got started, that healing would be linear or at least chronological. That if there was some sort of trauma point when I was 5, like when my mother shot herself and my world kind of went a little chaotic, that I thought a psychedelic session would deal with the trauma of that 5-year-old. And what I have learned instead is that for someone like me with, 19 years of dealing with trauma and neglect, that 5-year-old had a lot of layers of trauma. And so one psychedelic session wasn't going to dig into every single one of those. Even more surprising, that psychedelic session would sometimes go from that 5-year-old to the 16-year-old to the 24-year-old. And I did not in any way, shape, or form control what trauma was dealt with. So how do you begin to explain this to people? Because that answer really does not sit well. People want to heal what they want to heal. And so one of the best ways that I've come up to think about it, or ways that I explain it, is think of fingernails. Think of the idea that all 10 of your fingernails, every single one of them is chipped and raggedy, and it's catching on stuff, and it's causing you pain, and there is no nail file. Really, for most of my adult life, that was kind of my life. Things were uncomfortable. Things were painful. I just kind of kept on going despite the discomfort. I just kind of thought those raggedy nails or those triggers, they were just a part of my life. That's what I just assumed. I had no idea even like what a nail file is or how therapy could work or anything of that sort. My very first MDMA session, more specifically the integration period afterward, remember the integration is a time period after a psychedelic journey. It's like 40% of the whole process. When I started to shift ideas around my childhood, that's when the fingernail analogy works really well. So let's say that the 3-year-old, when my father decided to throw me across the room and I was petrified, a really horrible memory from when I was 3, versus the 5-year-old when my mother shot herself, versus the 10-year-old when I got thrown out of my father's house, yada, yada, yada. The thing is that let's say that first integration process was just one nail file on the 3-year-old, one nail file on the 5-year-old, one nail file on the 10-year-old. It didn't completely file down or heal the trauma point from that age in my life. And I know not everybody kind of works with the mindset of different ages. For me, it's been one of the easier ways for me to kind of quantify the traumas in my life by the ages more than the events, the ages. Because what I learned is that the ages had multiple layers to them. And so over the years, I wound up healing the PTSD specifically. I was no longer so hypervigilant. I was no longer suicidal. And then I still had the complex PTSD stuff. I still had the 19 years of neglect and abuse. And so every single psychedelic session, whether it was guided, whether it was at a retreat, whether it was by myself, and every single talk therapy session, which there have been countless, I consider every single one of those experiences to be a nail file. And in no way, shape, or form could I ever tell which trauma point or which age or which fingernail was going to get filed until kind of after the fact. And so I'm at the point now, if we carry this analogy through, that a lot of my fingernails are pretty gosh darn smooth. Occasionally, I'll hit some sort of mild trigger that I'm like, ooh, that's there. Ooh, I wonder what that is. Need to deal with it. And even 2 months ago, I went to a psilocybin retreat. I had a little bit of a trigger. I was feeling a little bit empty. It was summertime. I didn't have a lot of stuff going on. But the loneliness felt a little bit stronger than kind of an average thing. Sure enough, I went into the journey, said, what is going on here? And it was another trauma point from when I was 5 that was beautifully healed. Another file on that nail. I mentioned this analogy because one of the things that I've tried to explain to people, the way that healing feels, because people say, well, how do you really know that you've healed? And one of the ways I know is that my childhood, it doesn't feel rough anymore. It doesn't feel triggering anymore. When I go back and think about my childhood memories, it is no longer with my body freaking out and having tears come to my eyes or feeling anger. It's instead almost kind of from afar, very smooth road, kind of from afar, where I can say, that's really a shame that my father had that much trauma in his life, that that's how he treated people. Doesn't forgive him. It just acknowledges that there was more stuff going on than just me. And so that smoothness, that calmness, that's how I know I've healed a trauma point. And that's what brought me to the nail analogy and the seemingly randomness of how the medicine kind of works with different trauma points at different times. So like to carry the analogy over, I might never know exactly what age is going to get another nail file, or what age suddenly might, in 5 years have a little chip there that, oh, there's something else that I need to address or I need to heal. So I hope that my little nail analogy is making it clear, at least in my case, dealing with years and years and years of neglect and abuse, that it's okay if healing is not linear. It's especially okay if it's not chronological. A lot of times people say, the medicine takes you where the medicine needs to take you. I tend to think there's a little bit of that, and there's a little bit of the trauma takes you where you need to go at the time and what you're kind of ready to deal with. But that's my own kind of philosophy we can talk about later. My whole goal here was just to really create the correct expectations so that people don't get frustrated. I've seen too many folks go on retreats and they kind of wanted one thing to be healed or dealt with, and it didn't necessarily get dealt with, but there were other things that came up and they kind of got frustrated. And I would say that's part of the process, because you probably just don't have one chipped nail. You probably have a bunch of them in some different ways. All right, so if you want to hear more about my particular MDMA therapy process, that's my memoir, Rescuing Jill. You can find that over in Amazon. If you want to learn about the process of MDMA therapy, I made a free 5-day email course. I'll throw the address on here. You can go grab that when you want. And of course, you can always head over to thejourneysage.com. I've got lots and lots of resources over there. And so with all of that said, I wish you very smooth nails in the future, and take care.